50 years ago, a film came along that changed the course of cinema forever, and it made its director, Robert Altman, a complete legend. It also made the stars of the film, Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould, Sally Kellerman, and turned them into icons. This amazing film was MASH the movie. This film single-handedly set a new standard for what studios should produce in film today. MASH is often remembered because of the TV series, but the thing that put it on the map was the Robert Altman film that shares the same name. This film was a rebellious landmark in the history of filmmaking. MASH is a great black comedy film about war, based on a 1968 book by Richard Hooker, entitled MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors. The film depicts a unit of medical personnel stationed at a mobile Army surgical hospital. That's where the term MASH comes from. And this all happens during the Korean War. Robert Altman, who I have to say is one of my favorite directors. I really missed the products that this guy put out. But at that time, he was a relatively new filmmaker that wasn't really established at the time, and he lacked the credentials to justify his really unorthodox filmmaking process. But this guy had a history of turning down work rather than creating poor quality product because of the context of the film being made during the height of America's involvement in Vietnam. 20th Century Fox was really concerned that audiences would not understand that this film was actually taking place in the Korean War. At the request of the studio, a caption that mentions the Korean setting was added to the beginning of the film. There are also PA announcements throughout the film that serve this same purpose. Now, this film was a mega hit, and it did spawn the TV series that was based on the film, which ran for more than a decade and probably is one of the most beloved TV series ever made. It's one of those shows that are few and far between. It's the type of show that can be watched over and over and over again, no matter how many times you have seen a specific episode. But despite the success of the franchise that he helped create, Robert Altman never was a fan of the show. He stated that he's never really seen an entire episode all the way through, not one. He makes the comment that he just doesn't like it, and that he doesn't like the people that are in it. Now, I just really admire Robert Altman, but I don't understand this statement at all. I don't know if this is just jealousy or the fact that he's the one that put MASH on the map. I don't know. But for some reason, he just doesn't like the show. When studio executives first saw the film, they handed Altman 10 pages of notes for cuts and changes that they wanted made. But there was a screen test that saved this movie. The producer arranged for a screen test to be done in San Francisco. By the time Hawkeye was stealing the Jeep, the audience was openly applauding the film, and the executives for the studio decided just to tear up their notes about the changes that they wanted Altman to do. Now, as I said earlier, Robert Altman, who at this time had very little feature film experience, but he was extremely interested in directing this movie, and he made that clear to his agent, who was George Litto. Litto went to bat for Altman and lobbied for him really hard with the producers. The producers were just not convinced, though. They tried getting a bunch of other directors to do the job. Sidney Lumet was approached, Stanley Kubrick was asked, and they both turned the movie down. Altman actually ended up getting the movie by default. Nobody else wanted it. Robert Altman fought for a lot of stuff on this film, and he won a number of things while he was making MASH. But one of the things he didn't get was the casting of Father McCahey. According to the actor and writer Malachi McCourt, it stated that he was the original choice for that part, because Altman wanted a real-life Irish priest. The producer didn't agree, and the part ultimately went to Renee Auberjonois. One of the most recognizable parts of this movie and the TV show is the music. The song is titled "Suicide is Painless." The 14-year-old son of director Robert Altman, whose name was Mike, wrote the lyrics to this theme song. Because of its inclusion in the television series afterwards, he continued to get residuals throughout its run and its syndication. His father was paid $75,000 for directing the original movie, but his son eventually made about $2 million in the song royalties, with the payments continuing through the present day. This is not bad for a 14-year-old kid. You see, Robert Altman had tried to write the lyrics himself. He really wanted a stupid song, a song that just didn't make any sense. And he had trouble doing that and writing it to where it would be dumb enough. And that's when he ended up giving it to his 14-year-old son. This son of his sat down and wrote the lyrics in about 5 minutes. And he never expected to be paid, since he was the director's son. The operating room scenes were almost cut out due to their graphic nature. However, 2 women were visiting the set, and they told the producers that the operating scenes were what made the movie intense and great, and that they should be kept in. So they took their advice and never had them edited out. Now, the story goes that when Robert Altman was editing the movie with his editor, Danford B. Green, they had nude pinups on the wall of their editing room. The head of post-production for the studio came by and tried to stop Altman from using the editing machine, as he wasn't a designated editor. Altman then threw him out of the editing room. The very next day, a memo came down from 20th Century Fox and their front office stating that they had initiated a new policy, that there were to be no pinups on the walls of the editing rooms. Altman took this memo to the sound recording studio and added it in to the loudspeaker announcements that were shown during the film. What a great way to get back at these studio heads. Altman has stated numerous times that he felt like he was able to get away with a lot, much more than he should have been during the shooting of this movie, because the officials at 20th Century Fox were keeping a closer watch on their 2 massively expensive projects. There were also war films, and that would be Patton from 1970 and Tora, Tora, Tora from 1970 also. And it's pretty neat to notice that all 3 of these films turned out to be critical and box office successes. Robert Altman initially considered James Garner for the part of Hawkeye, until Donald Sutherland lobbied so hard for the role. Garner was actually a Korea War veteran who had been wounded and treated in a military hospital during the war. For the scene in which the officers ambush Hot Lips, played by Sally Kellerman, so that they can see her naked in the shower, Altman had to deploy a few distractions. Kellerman had never appeared nude on screen before. In earlier takes of the scene, she was dropping to the ground before the point of the moment was even made clear. So Altman had to think of distractions to get her to pause before falling to the ground. Kellerman said that once he had initiated these distractions, the first take, he had Gary Burkhoff standing stark naked in front of her. Then the very next take, he had Tamara Horrocks, who plays a well-endowed nurse, standing there without her shirt on. This distracted her enough to where she hung in there long enough before she hit the deck. During the filming of the movie, Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould became so frustrated with the directorial style of Robert Altman that they went to the head of production to demand that he be fired. They were concerned that the movie would end up being a total mess, a complete movie disaster at the box office, and they thought it might ruin their careers. They were then told by the studio head not to worry about that, The studio head said that the movie would only be seen in a few drive-ins across the country, that there was no way it would ruin their careers because nobody was going to see it. Elliott Gould finally confessed this to Robert Altman, and Altman laughed about it and took it in stride, and they continued to work with each other in other Altman films. When the movie was finally released, the military wanted to not run the movie in their theaters because they felt it had such an anti-war message. Instead, what they did to combat this was the military chose to run Patton the following week after MASH aired, feeling that this film was more complimentary to the military. Although this film is set on the front lines of the Korean War, the only gunshots that you hear during the entire run of the movie are from the referee's pistol during the inter-camp football game. This is a classic. I love this movie, and I can watch it many times without becoming tired of it. We all see reruns of MASH the TV series. Take some time and go back and watch what really set everything into motion for anything MASH related. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.